The Ancient Book of Enoch, Part 8, The First and Second Dreams, Chapter 89, A, The Flood. One of those four went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret while it was terrified. He was born a bull but became a man, and built a great vessel and dwelt in it. 3 bulls dwelt with him in that vessel which covered them. I looked up to heaven and saw a high roof with 7 water torrents. A great amount of water flowed through those torrents into an enclosure. As I was watching, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I watched that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. The water, darkness, and mist kept increasing. The water rose above the height of that enclosure, and streamed over the sides and poured upon the whole earth. All the cattle gathered together, but eventually they were swallowed up and perished in that water. But the vessel floated upon the water, while all the cattle, elephants, camels, and asses, along with all the animals, sank to the bottom, so that I could no longer see them. They were not able to escape, but perished into the depths. Then the water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these abysses, till the earth became visible, and that vessel settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, and light appeared. But that white bull, which had become a man, came out of that vessel, and the 3 bulls with him. And one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and one black. And that white bull departed from them. They began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different species: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens, and among them was born a white bull. They began to bite one another. But that white bull which was born among them begat a wild ass and a white bull with it, and the wild asses multiplied. But that bull which was born from him begat a black wild boar and a white sheep, and the former begat many boars, but that sheep begat 12 sheep. When those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses, and those asses again gave up that sheep to the wolves. And that sheep grew up among the wolves. And the Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it, and to pasture with it among the wolves. And they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. The wolves began to fear them, and they oppressed them until they killed their little ones, and they cast their young into a great river of water. But those sheep began to cry aloud on account of their little ones, and to complain unto their Lord. The sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild asses. And I saw the sheep how they lamented and cried, and besought their Lord with all their might, till the Lord of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a lofty abode, and came to them and pastured them. He called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spoke with it concerning the wolves, that it should warn them not to touch the sheep. The sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the Lord, and another sheep met it and went with it, and the 2 went together and entered into the assembly of those wolves, and spoke with them and warned them not to touch the sheep any longer. Then I saw the wolves, and how they greatly oppressed the sheep with all their power, and the sheep cried aloud. The Lord came to the sheep, and they began to smite those wolves. And the wolves began to make lamentation, but the sheep became quiet and ceased crying out. The sheep departed from the wolves, but the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and those wolves pursued the sheep with all their power. And the Lord of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him. And his face was dazzling and glorious to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep till they reached a sea of water. And that sea was divided, and the water stood on both sides right before their eyes, and their Lord led them and stood between them and the wolves. Even though those wolves could not see the sheep, they proceeded into the midst of that sea, following the sheep. When they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to flee, but that sea gathered itself together, and became as it had been created, and the water drowned those wolves. But the sheep escaped from that water and traveled into a wilderness where there was no water or grass, and they began to open their eyes and see. And I saw the Lord of the sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that sheep going and leading them. And that sheep ascended to the summit of that lofty rock, and the Lord of the sheep sent it to them. After that I saw the Lord of the sheep, who stood before them, and his appearance was great, terrible, and majestic. And all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. They all feared and trembled because of him. And they cried to that sheep with them, We are not able to stand before our Lord, or to behold him. Then that sheep which led them again ascended to the summit of that rock. But the sheep began to be blinded and to wander from the way which he had showed them, but that sheep did not know it. The Lord of the sheep was enraged at them, and that sheep discovered it, and went down from the summit of the rock and came to the sheep, and found the greatest part of them blinded and fallen away. When they saw it, they feared and trembled at its presence, and desired to return to their folds. And that sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And the sheep feared its presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and they returned to their folds. Then I saw in this vision till that sheep became a man and built a house for the Lord of the sheep, and placed all the sheep in that house. And I saw till this sheep which had met that sheep which led them died, and I saw till all the great sheep died, and little ones arose in their place, and they came to a pasture and approached a stream of water. Then that sheep, their leader which had become a man, withdrew from them and died, and all the sheep sought it and cried over it greatly. I saw till they stopped crying for that sheep and crossed that stream of water, and there arose the other sheep as leaders in the place of those which had led them and fallen asleep. The sheep came to a good place, a pleasant and glorious land, and I saw till those sheep were satisfied, and that house stood amongst them in the pleasant land. And sometimes their eyes were opened and sometimes blinded, till another sheep arose and led them and brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. The dogs, foxes, and wild boars began to devour those sheep, till the Lord of the sheep raised up a ram from their midst, which led them. And that ram began to butt those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, till he had destroyed them all. And that sheep whose eyes were opened saw that ram which was amongst the sheep, till it forsook its glory, and began to butt those sheep, and trampled upon them, and behaved itself unseemly. The Lord of the sheep sent the sheep to a lamb, and raised it to be a ram and leader of the sheep, instead of that ram which had forsaken its glory. It went to it and spoke to it alone, and raised it to be a ram, and made it the prince and leader of the sheep. But during all these things, those dogs oppressed the sheep. The first ram pursued that second ram, and that second ram arose and fled before it. And I saw till those dogs pulled down the first ram. That second ram arose and led the sheep. Those sheep grew and multiplied, but all the dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled from him. That ram butted and killed the wild beasts. That ram begat many sheep and fell asleep. And a little sheep became a prince and leader of those sheep. That house became great and broad, and it was built for those sheep. And a great and lofty tower was built on the house for the Lord of the sheep. And that house was low, but the tower was elevated and lofty. And the Lord of the sheep stood on that tower, and they offered a full table before him. Those sheep again erred and went many ways, and forsook their house. And the Lord of the sheep called some from amongst the sheep, and sent them to the sheep. But the sheep began to slay them. One of them was saved and was not slain, and it sped away and cried aloud over the sheep, and they sought to kill it. But the Lord of the sheep saved it from the sheep, and brought it up to me, and caused it to dwell there. He sent many other sheep to those sheep to testify unto them, and lament over them. After that I saw that when they forsook the house of the Lord and his tower, they fell away entirely, and their eyes were blinded. And I saw the Lord of the sheep, how he wrought much slaughter amongst them in their herds, until those sheep invited that slaughter and betrayed his place. He gave them over into the hands of the lions and tigers, wolves and hyenas, and into the hand of the foxes and wild beasts. And those wild beasts began to tear those sheep into pieces. I saw that Yahweh left the house and the tower, and gave it all into the hands of the lions, that they should tear down and destroy them. I began to cry aloud with all my power, and to appeal to the Lord of the sheep in regard to the sheep. But he remained unmoved, though he saw it, and rejoiced that they were devoured, swallowed, and robbed. He left them in the hands of those beasts for food,